The sound of shattering crystal punctuated the sudden silence that fell over the grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel. Elise Thorne, with coffee staining her once pristine white uniform, stared in horror at the fragments of what had been a $50,000 champagne flute scattered across the marble floor. Above her towered Damian Blackwood, the infamous tech titan whose net worth had just crossed into 13-digit territory that morning. His steel gray eyes held nothing but contempt. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, making the venom in his words all the more potent. "That glass was older than your entire family line." The gathered elite of New York's high society watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. No one moved to help the young woman, whose hands now trembled uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood, it was an accident," Elise began, her voice barely audible. "An accident?" Damian gave a cold laugh that sent shivers down her spine. "No, an accident is what happens when competent people make rare mistakes. This," he gestured at the mess, "is the inevitable result of allowing someone of your station to serve in a place like this." The words cut deeper than any blade could. Elise's cheeks burned with humiliation as whispers rippled through the crowd. She had taken this catering job to pay for her final semester of medical school, one shift to cover a month's rent. Now, it would cost her far more. "My station?" she repeated, something sparking in her hazel eyes that made Damian narrow his own. "Yes, your station," he said, leaning closer. "Some people are meant to build empires, others to clean up after them. I suggest you get a broom and remember which category you fall into." What happened next became the stuff of Manhattan legend. Elise straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the eyes of the most powerful man in the room. "I know exactly who I am, Mr. Blackwood. The question is, do you?" She removed her apron with deliberate care, placed it on a nearby table, and walked out of the ballroom with a dignity that made several guests lower their gazes in shame. Damian watched her go, an unfamiliar sensation settling in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as respect, quickly crushed beneath the weight of his ego. "Someone clean this up," he commanded, turning back to his admiring circle, already forgetting the face of the woman who had dared to challenge him. But 5 years would pass, and on a rain-slicked street in Lower Manhattan, fate would ensure that Damian Blackwood would remember Elise Thorne with crystal clarity. Because empires rise and fall, and sometimes, so do emperors. Thunder rolled across the Manhattan skyline as Damian Blackwood's sleek Bentley crawled through unexpected traffic. He drummed his fingers impatiently against the leather armrest, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. "I'm going to miss this meeting, Lawrence," he snapped at his driver. "Find another route." "There's been an accident ahead, sir. Emergency services are blocking all lanes." Damian cursed under his breath. The Monarch Medical Center was about to announce its new chief of emergency medicine, and he was the primary benefactor who had made the expansion possible. His absence would be noted, his power momentarily diminished. "Pull over, I'll walk the remaining blocks." "But sir, the rain." Now, moments later, Damian stepped onto the glistening sidewalk, his Italian shoes immediately soaked by a puddle. The downpour intensified as if taking personal delight in his discomfort. He moved swiftly, dodging other pedestrians, his custom umbrella battling against the wind. That's when he saw her. She was kneeling beside a homeless man who had collapsed against a building, her hands moving with practiced precision as she checked his vitals. Her medical bag lay open beside her, and despite the rain soaking through her clothes, her focus remained unbroken. Something about her arrested Damian's movement. A half-forgotten memory tugged at his consciousness. Then she looked up, calling to a bystander to dial 911, and Damian saw her face clearly. 5 years had passed, but those hazel eyes remained unchanged. Dr. Elise Thorne didn't notice him standing there. She was too busy saving a life. The ceremony had already begun when Damian finally arrived, water dripping from his coat despite efforts to dry himself. He took his seat on the stage, half listening to the hospital director's speech. His mind remained outside in the rain, with a woman who had once walked away from him with her dignity intact. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our new Chief of Emergency Medicine, a doctor whose groundbreaking research on trauma care in underserved communities has revolutionized our approach. Please welcome Dr. Elise Thorne. Damien's Eeyore head snapped up as applause filled the auditorium. Through the stage entrance she appeared, the same woman from the street, now dry and composed in a professional blazer, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun. Their eyes met across the stage. A flicker of recognition crossed her features before her expression cooled to professional neutrality. She approached the podium without acknowledging him further. "Thank you, Director Phillips. I'm honored to accept this position and the responsibility it entails." Her voice carried the same quiet confidence that had haunted Damien for 5 years, as she outlined her vision for the emergency department, emphasizing equal care regardless of patients' financial status. He found himself genuinely listening, not analyzing for weakness or calculating advantage as he typically did, just listening. When she finished her speech, Damien joined the standing ovation mechanically, his mind racing. The universe had a perverse sense of humor. The woman he had humiliated was now in charge of a department bearing his name. Later at the reception, he approached her deliberately. She saw him coming and excused herself from conversation with a colleague. "Dr. Thorne," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your appointment." "Mr. Blackwood." Her handshake was firm but brief. "Thank you for your generous donation to the hospital." No mention of their previous encounter. No indication that she remembered the young catering assistant who had walked away from his cruelty, but they both knew. "I hope we can work closely together. I have some ideas for the emergency department," he said. Elise's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, my assistant can schedule a meeting." She turned to leave, but Damien caught her arm gently. "You don't remember me, do you?" The look she gave him could have frozen fire. "I remember everything, Mr. Blackwood, including who holds the broom now." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in a crowded room for the second time in their acquaintance. And for the second time, Damien Blackwood found himself reluctantly impressed. "Your department is hemorrhaging money, Dr. Thorne." Damien's voice echoed in the hospital boardroom as he gestured at the spreadsheet displayed on the screen. $3 million over budget in just 4 months. Elise remained unfazed, watching him pace like a caged predator. The monthly oversight meeting had turned into an ambush, with board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the hospital's primary benefactor systematically dismantled her emergency department's financial performance. "Those aren't expenses, Mr. Blackwood, they're investments," she replied, her tone level. "Every dollar you see there represents lives saved." Damien scoffed. "Poetic, but hardly practical. This institution needs to remain solvent to help anyone." "Then perhaps you should have donated to a bank instead of a hospital." The tension in the room crystallized. Director Phillips cleared his throat nervously, attempting to intervene, but Damien raised a hand to silence him. "Could you all give Dr. Thorne and me the room, please?" It wasn't a request. The board members filed out, some casting sympathetic glances at Elise, who remained seated, her posture betraying nothing of the fury building inside her. When the door closed, Damien took the seat across from her. "What game are you playing?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Medicine isn't a game to me." "Everything's a game. You're just losing this one." He leaned forward. "You've implemented experimental trauma protocols without board approval, hired staff beyond your allocated headcount, and ordered equipment that wasn't budgeted. It's almost as if you're deliberately trying to provoke me." Elise finally allowed herself to show emotion, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Not everything revolves around you, Damien. Those experimental protocols have reduced mortality rates by 27%. Those excess staff members mean patients aren't dying in hallways. That unnecessary equipment detected a brain hemorrhage in a 4-year-old last week that would have been missed otherwise." She pushed a folder across the table. "Here are the outcomes you won't see on your precious spreadsheets." Damien didn't open the folder. "You know I could have you removed with one phone call." "You could," she acknowledged, "but you won't." "And why is that?" "Because despite everything, you're not actually the monster you pretend to be." The words hung between them, unexpected and disarming. Damien's carefully constructed facade cracked ever so slightly. "You don't know me. I know you visited the pediatric ward 6 times after hours when you thought no one would notice," Elise said quietly. "I know you sat with the homeless man I was treating that day in the rain until his sister arrived. The same man you later arranged housing for." Damien's expression hardened. "Having me followed is beneath you, doctor." "I didn't have to. Hospital security cameras don't lie, and nurses talk." She stood, gathering her papers. "Your money built this wing, but it's your actions when you think no one is watching that interest me." She moved to leave, but Damien's voice stopped her. "My father died in an emergency room much like yours," he said, the words emerging as if pulled from some deep wounded place. "The doctor said they were too busy to see him immediately. A janitor found him an hour later. He'd had an aortic dissection." Elise turned slowly. "I didn't know." "How could you? It's not in any biography or interview." His laugh was hollow. "Damien Blackwood built an empire from nothing after losing everything. Makes for a better story than the truth. Which is that I've spent 20 years building wealth to ensure no hospital would ever prioritize finances over a patient again." He finally opened the folder she'd given him, examining the statistics and patient outcomes. "And here you are, running my emergency department into financial ruin to save people who can't pay." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Elise returned to the table, sitting beside him rather than across. "Let me show you something." She turned pages until she reached a photograph of a young girl. "This is Mia, 10 years old. Her parents are undocumented. They waited 3 days before bringing her in because they were afraid of deportation. By then, her appendix had ruptured." She turned another page. "This is Mia now back in school because we didn't turn her family away." Page after page, she showed him the human beings behind the numbers. Eventually, Damien closed the folder, his expression unreadable. "I still think you're being financially reckless," he said finally. "And I still think you're being needlessly cruel," she countered. "But perhaps we're both wrong about each other." Thunder rumbled outside, echoing the unspoken tension in the room. When Damien spoke again, his voice had lost its cutting edge. "Have dinner with me tonight." Elise blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "Dinner, a neutral location. We discuss how to make this department sustainable without compromising care." He stood, straightening his tie. "Unless you're afraid to face me outside these walls, Dr. Thorne." The challenge hung in the air between them. "Fine," she said eventually, "but I choose the restaurant." A hint of a genuine smile touched Damien's lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As he left the boardroom, neither of them acknowledged the subtle shift that had occurred, a first fragile bridge spanning the chasm between their worlds. Outside, the storm intensified, washing away the boundaries they had both so carefully constructed. Elise's choice of restaurant wasn't what Damien expected. No Michelin stars, no exclusive reservations, not even a proper wine list. Just a small, family-owned Italian place in Queens where the owner greeted her by name and kissed both her cheeks. "Marco lost his health insurance after his factory closed," she explained as they were seated in a quiet corner. "The hospital wrote off his bypass surgery. Now I never pay for tiramisu here." Damien observed her in this environment, relaxed, genuine, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes far better than the formal hospital attire. Here, away from the sterile walls of the hospital, she was even more captivating. "You make a habit of dining in establishments owned by your patients?" he asked, studying the humble menu. "I make a habit of remaining connected to the community I serve," she corrected him. "Something your quarterly reports don't measure." The familiar tension threatened to resurface, but Damien surprised her by setting down his menu and folding his hands. Let's establish new ground rules for tonight, he proposed. No hospital talk, no budgets, no past grievances. Elise raised an eyebrow. Then what exactly would we discuss, Mr. Blackwood? Damien, he corrected. And we could start with why someone brilliant enough to have her pick of prestigious positions chose emergency medicine in an underfunded hospital. Their conversation flowed unexpectedly from there. Elise spoke of growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, of the community clinic doctor who had treated her asthma for free, inspiring her career path. Damien shared stories of his early business failures, the mentor who had believed in him when no one else would. The simple food arrived unpretentious and delicious. Damien found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in years at Elise's animated retelling of her medical school disasters. Your turn, she said, taking a sip of wine. Tell me something no one knows about the great Damien Blackwood. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn poker chip. I carry this everywhere. It was my father's lucky charm. He was going to use it at a casino the weekend after he died. Elise gently took the chip, examining it. This is why you built the hospital wing, isn't it? I told you. No hospital talk, he reminded her, but there was no edge to his words. It's not about the hospital. It's about you. She returned the chip, her fingers brushing his. The man who publicly humiliated me 5 years ago would never carry a sentimental token. Perhaps that man never existed. Perhaps it was just armor. The confession hung between them like delicate crystal, fragile and valuable. After dinner, they walked through a small neighborhood park, the spring air cool, but pleasant. Neither seemed eager to end the evening. Why did you really ask me to dinner? Elise finally asked, stopping beside a small fountain. Damien considered his answer carefully. Because you're the only person who's seen through me twice. First when you walked away from me at that gala, and again in the boardroom today. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have. He turned to face her directly. I've spent my life building walls no one could scale. You walked through them as if they weren't there. Elise studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. And what happens tomorrow? We go back to being adversaries over budget spreadsheets? No, Damien said with quiet certainty. Tomorrow I transfer an additional $50 million to the emergency department's endowment, with one condition. Her expression cooled immediately. I don't accept bribes, even philanthropic ones. The condition is that you use it however you see fit, he continued, unfazed by her assumption. No oversight committees, no quarterly reviews, just your judgment, which I've come to trust more than my own in these matters. Elise stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because some debts can't be repaid with money alone. He took a step closer. 5 years ago, I tried to put you in your place. I was wrong about what that place was. The weight of that moment, the apology embedded in his words, settled around them like a mantle. And what about us? She asked quietly. Is this guilt? Attraction? A game to conquer the one person who stood up to you? I don't know, Damien admitted, the uncertainty foreign on his lips. But I'd like to find out if you're willing. Elise didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small fragment of crystal, the broken piece from the champagne flute from 5 years ago. I kept this, she confessed. Not as a reminder to hate you, but as a promise to myself never to be silenced again. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. I'm not the same woman who walked away that night. I'm counting on that, Damien said, his voice rough with emotion. Because I'm not the same man either. The fountain bubbled quietly beside them as Elise made her decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently against his, a tentative first step across the final boundary between them. When she pulled away, Damien's expression had transformed, vulnerability replacing the armor he'd worn for decades. Does this mean you accept my funding proposal, Dr. Thorne? He asked, a hint of his old arrogance returning, though now softened with affection. It means I accept the possibility of us. She corrected him. The rest will negotiate. I'm still expecting those quarterly reports." Damien laughed, the sound unburdened and real. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they walked hand in hand through the park, neither knew exactly what tomorrow would bring. But for two people who had spent their lives planning every detail, the uncertainty felt strangely like freedom. In the end, it wasn't about the fall of a mighty empire or the rise of an underdog. It was simpler than that. Two people who had finally found someone who could see beyond their carefully constructed facades, someone who could challenge them to be better versions of themselves. And sometimes that was victory enough. The rain fell in torrents over Manhattan, transforming the streets into reflective ribbons that shimmered beneath the city lights. Inside the gleaming Archer Tower, Maxwell Sinclair paced the length of his penthouse office, his Italian leather, shoes clicking against the marble floor with each determined step. At 35, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, and his reputation for ruthlessness in business was matched only by his contempt for weakness. "The acquisition is non-negotiable," Maxwell stated coldly, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the New York skyline as he spoke into his earpiece. "Either Vanguard Tech sells to me by Friday or I'll ensure they're worthless by Monday. Their choice." He ended the call with a sharp tap and turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating his chiseled features that had graced countless business magazines and that women found irresistible. Yet behind the perfect veneer, a hollow emptiness resided in Maxwell's chest, one that his wealth had never been able to fill. "Sir?" His assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Your dinner reservation at Elysium is in 20 minutes. Without bothering to acknowledge her, Maxwell grabbed his tailored overcoat and strode toward the private elevator. Another business, dinner, another deal, another victory to add to his collection. The predictability of it all left a bitter taste in his mouth. 15 minutes later, his chauffeur pulled up to Elysium, the city's most exclusive restaurant. But as Maxwell stepped out of his Bentley, fate would finally disrupt his meticulously controlled existence. "I'm going to be late again," Eliza Moore whispered desperately as she sprinted through the rain, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles. At 27, she had dreams far bigger than her current reality, working at Burger Haven during the day while studying interior design at night. Her curly chestnut hair was plastered to her face, her uniform barely protected by her thin raincoat. She didn't see the man stepping out of the luxury car until it was too late. Their collision sent her tumbling backward onto the wet sidewalk, her bag spilling its contents across the pavement. "Watch where you're going," Maxwell snapped, his irritation flaring as he examined his now-stained sleeve. Eliza looked up, rain mingling with tears of frustration. "I'm so sorry, Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment something inexplicable passed between them, a current of recognition that neither had ever experienced. Maxwell, for once in his life, found himself momentarily speechless as he stared into her warm amber eyes. The spell broke when his phone rang. Without offering to help, he stepped around her and disappeared into the restaurant's gilded entrance. Eliza gathered her belongings, her hands trembling with both anger and an emotion she couldn't quite name. She had no idea who he was, this arrogant man in his perfect suit who hadn't even offered to help her up. And she certainly had no idea that this chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Inside the restaurant, Maxwell found himself distracted throughout the entire business dinner. The woman's face lingered in his mind, her defiant eyes, the quiet dignity in her expression despite her obvious struggle. For the first time in years, Maxwell Sinclair felt something crack in the impenetrable armor around his heart. Meanwhile, Eliza arrived at Burger Haven 20 minutes late, earning a stern warning from her manager. As she tied her apron with shaking hands, she had no way of knowing that the man who had just dismissed her existence would soon become inescapably entangled in her life, or that beneath his cruel exterior lay a soul as lost as her own. The rain continued to pour outside, washing away the evidence of their first encounter but cementing the invisible thread that now connected them across the vast divide of their worlds. 3 days after their sidewalk collision, Maxwell sat in his office reviewing acquisition papers when his assistant knocked tentatively on his door. "Mr. Sinclair, the board is waiting in the conference room for your quarterly presentation." Maxwell glanced at his watch. He'd lost track of time again, something that had never happened before that rainy night. With a curt nod, he gathered his materials and strode down the hallway, his mind inexplicably drifting to amber eyes and rain-soaked curls. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. Maxwell had just begun his presentation when his vision suddenly blurred. The room tilted sideways, and before anyone could react, the notorious Maxwell Sinclair, a man known for never showing weakness, collapsed onto the polished conference table. He awoke in a hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling his nostrils. A doctor stood over him, her expression grave. "Mr. Sinclair, you've suffered a stress-induced cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but a warning. Your blood pressure is dangerously high and your cortisol levels indicate extreme chronic stress. Put simply, your lifestyle is killing you." Maxwell scoffed. "Prescribe whatever you need, too, but I have meetings to." "What you need isn't medication," the doctor interrupted, something few dared to do with him. "You need a complete lifestyle change. I'm ordering 2 months of reduced work hours, daily exercise, proper nutrition, and," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "regular interaction with normal people outside your corporate bubble. That's absurd. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I can't just—" "You won't be running anything if you're dead, Mr. Sinclair," she stated flatly. "And I've already discussed this with your board. They've agreed to temporary leadership changes while you recover. Either follow my prescription, or I'll be forced to declare you medically unfit to lead your company." For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Sinclair had been outmaneuvered. Fury bubbled within him as he was discharged with strict instructions to experience ordinary life and find activities that bring genuine joy. Across town, Eliza stared in disbelief at the eviction notice on her apartment door. Her roommate had moved out unexpectedly, leaving Eliza with double the rent and no way to pay it. With student loans already crushing her and only part-time hours at Burger Haven, she was out of options. "I can increase your hours," her manager offered when she explained her situation. "But we just had our corporate inspection, and they're sending someone from headquarters to oversee operations for the next month or so. Some new initiative to have executives understand the frontline experience." Eliza sighed with relief at the promise of more hours. "Thank you, Jeff. I don't care who they send. I'll work with anyone if it means keeping my apartment." The what? Next morning, Maxwell's driver pulled up to a nondescript strip mall on the outskirts of Manhattan. Maxwell stared through the window at the illuminated Burger Haven sign with undisguised contempt. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, straightening his tie, the only concession to casual attire being his lack of a suit jacket. His company owned a chain of mid-range restaurants, including this burger franchise, acquired mainly as a tax write-off. When his board had suggested he fulfill the doctor's orders by participating in their new executive immersion program, he'd nearly fired them all. Yet here he was, about to work alongside the team at one of his company's most profitable fast food locations. The irony wasn't lost on him. From commanding boardrooms to flipping burgers, all because his body had betrayed him. He stepped into the restaurant, the artificial scent of processed food assaulting his senses. The manager, Jeff according to his name tag, approached nervously. "Mr. Sinclair, it's an honor to have you here. We've prepared a special observation area where you can—" "The point is participation, not observation," Maxwell interrupted coldly. "Show me the operations and let's get this farce over with." Jeff nodded frantically. "Of course, sir. Our best team member will train you. Eliza." Maxwell turned as a young woman emerged from the back, tying an apron around her waist. Time seemed to stop as recognition dawned on both their faces. The same amber eyes that had haunted his thoughts now widened in shock. "You," Eliza gasped. "You know each other?" Jeff asked, confusion evident in his voice. Before either could respond, the morning rush began as the doors opened, letting in a crowd of hungry customers. Maxwell stood frozen, his carefully constructed world tilting once again, but this time, not from a medical condition, Eliza's initial shock gave way to a small, defiant smile as she handed him an apron. "Well, Mr. Sinclair, I guess I'll be teaching you a thing or two today." In that moment, as he reluctantly took the offered apron, Maxwell realized this punishment might be far more complicated than he'd anticipated. What neither of them knew was that this unexpected circumstance would force them to see beyond the surfaces they presented to the world and discover truths about themselves they'd long buried beneath pride and necessity. 2 weeks into his rehabilitation, Maxwell had discovered muscles he didn't know existed. His hands, once pristine, now bore small burns from the grill and deep fryer. His expensive cologne competed with the persistent scent of grease that seemed to follow him home each night. But what truly unsettled him was Eliza Moore. "You're putting too much sauce again," she noted, watching him prepare an order. Unlike his other employees who trembled in his presence, Eliza showed no deference to his status. She treated him exactly, as she would any other new hire, with patience but without coddling. "The customer asked for extra sauce," Maxwell replied defensively. "Extra doesn't mean drowning," Eliza explained, demonstrating the proper technique. "These people come here every day. Mrs. Abernathy always says extra, but actually wants just a little more than standard. If you really drown it, she'll complain." Maxwell frowned. "How am I supposed to know that?" "By paying attention to people, not just profit margins." Her words carried no malice, just matter-of-fact observation. That evening, as they closed the restaurant, Maxwell found himself lingering. Over the past fortnight, he'd begun noticing things about Eliza: how she remembered every regular customer's name, how she slipped extra fries to the homeless man, who occasionally sheltered in their doorway, how she never complained despite working double shifts most days. "Don't you have a chauffeur waiting?" Eliza asked as she counted her register. "I gave him the night off," Maxwell answered, surprising himself with the admission. "I thought I might walk for a change." Eliza's eyebrows rose. "The doctor's orders are working then?" A small, reluctant smile tugged at Maxwell's lips. "Perhaps." They exited together, the awkwardness between them shifting into something less antagonistic. As they stood beneath the flickering neon sign, Maxwell found himself asking, "Which way are you headed?" "Brighton Heights," she answered cautiously. Maxwell's brow furrowed. "That's over an hour by subway at this time of night." Eliza shrugged. "I'm used to it. My driver could." Maxwell stumbled over his words. Unused to, offering assistance rather than commands. "I don't need charity, Mr. Sinclair," Eliza replied, her pride evident. "Maxwell," he corrected quietly. "And it's not charity to want a colleague home safely." Their eyes met in the glow of the neon light, a silent negotiation taking place. Finally, Eliza nodded. Just this once. During the car ride, an uncomfortable silence filled the space between them until Maxwell finally spoke. "Why interior design?" Eliza looked surprised that he remembered her studies. "Because spaces affect people. A well-designed room can change how someone feels, how they interact, how they live. It's transformative." Something in her passionate explanation resonated with Maxwell. "My mother was interested in design," he admitted, the words emerging from someplace long buried. "Before she died, she was always rearranging our little apartment, making it feel like somewhere else, somewhere better." Eliza studied his profile, seeing past the billionaire facade to the human beneath. "That's why I do it, to create better somewhere else's." When they arrived at her building, a dilapidated structure with visible code violations, Maxwell felt an unfamiliar twist in his chest. Eliza lived here, in property that his contemporaries would condemn without a second thought. "Thank you for the ride," Eliza said, preparing to exit. "Wait," Maxwell found himself saying. Would you show me some of your designs sometime?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken significance. This wasn't about designs. It was about crossing a boundary. Eliza hesitated before answering. "I work tomorrow night too." So do I, Maxwell replied, the irony not lost on either of them. As she disappeared into her building, Maxwell sat back against the leather seat, disturbed by the unfamiliar emotions churning within him. He'd built his empire by seeing people as resources or obstacles, never as individuals with dreams and struggles and value beyond their utility to him. Yet here was Eliza Moore, a woman who lived in near poverty but carried herself with more dignity than most billionaires he knew. A woman who created community in a fast food restaurant, of all places. A woman who saw through his armor to the lost boy beneath, the boy who'd sworn never to be vulnerable again after losing everything. Back in his penthouse, Maxwell poured himself a whiskey and walked to the window. The city sprawled before him, glittering with promise. From this height, the people below were merely specks, anonymous and interchangeable. But now, when he closed his eyes, he could see their faces. Mrs. Abernathy with her specific sauce preferences. Carlos, the morning regular who worked 3 jobs to put his daughter through college. The homeless man whose name he'd learned today was Victor, a veteran who'd once been an engineer. And Eliza, with her amber eyes that challenged him to be better than his bank account. For the first time in decades, Maxwell Sinclair felt the protective walls around his heart beginning to crumble, and the sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. What he didn't know was that Eliza, too, lay awake that night, wrestling with her own unexpected feelings for a man she'd sworn to despise. A man who, beneath his arrogance and wealth, might be worth knowing after all. 1 month after Maxwell Sinclair first donned a Burger Haven apron, the restaurant became the unexpected stage for a confrontation that would change everything. "I'm telling you, there's no error," insisted the property manager, his voice rising as he faced Eliza in the nearly empty restaurant. Brighton Heights was purchased by Archer Developments last week. All residents have 60 days to vacate. Maxwell, who had been restocking supplies, froze at the mention of his subsidiary company. "That's impossible," Eliza argued, her voice trembling. "There was no notice, no opportunity to—" "It's all legal," the manager cut her off, sliding paperwork across the counter. "Corporate buyouts don't require tenant approval. If you have concerns, take it up with Archer Developments, or rather, with Maxwell Sinclair." The man departed, leaving a devastating silence in his wake. Slowly, Eliza turned toward Maxwell, betrayal darkening her eyes. "You knew," she whispered, the words falling like stones between them. "All this time while working beside me, sharing rides home, listening to my dreams, you knew you were destroying my home." Maxwell stepped forward. "Eliza, I swear I didn't—" "Don't," she interrupted, tears threatening to spill. "Don't you dare lie to me. Brighton Heights is being demolished for what? Another luxury tower? Another tax write-off?" The truth hit Maxwell with crushing force. This acquisition had been set in motion months ago, before his collapse, before Burger Haven, before Eliza. It was exactly the kind of ruthless business move he'd built his empire on: buy distressed properties, evict tenants, rebuild for maximum profit. He'd signed the paperwork without a second thought about the lives he was displacing. Lives like Eliza's. "I'll fix this," he promised, reaching for his phone. "You can't fix everything with money," Eliza replied bitterly. "Some things, once broken, stay that way." She untied her apron and placed it on the counter. "Congratulations, Mr. Sinclair. You've completed your executive immersion. You've experienced how the other half lives, right before crushing them, under your heel." She walked out, leaving Maxwell standing alone beneath the fluorescent lights, the weight of his choices suffocating him. That night, for the first time since childhood, Maxwell Sinclair wept. He wept for the man he'd become, a man who measured success in dollars rather than in the lives he touched. He wept for Eliza and the trust he'd shattered. Most of all, he wept for the realization that all his wealth meant nothing if it cost him his humanity. Dawn found him still at his desk, surrounded by architectural plans and legal documents. His assistant entered cautiously, alarmed to find him in yesterday's clothes. "Cancel my meetings," Maxwell instructed without looking up. "And get me the Archer development team, the Brighton Heights property manager, and my legal department. Now." 3 days passed with no sign of Eliza at Burger Haven. Maxwell worked tirelessly, sleep forgotten as he poured himself into his new mission. On the 4th day, he stood outside her apartment building, heart pounding as he knocked on her door. When Eliza finally answered, her eyes were rimmed with red, her expression guarded. "5 minutes," Maxwell requested. "That's all I ask." Reluctantly, she stepped aside. "I was wrong," he began, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "Not just about Brighton Heights, but about everything. About what matters. About what success truly means." He handed her a folder. Inside were new architectural plans for Brighton Heights, not for demolition, but for renovation. The existing structure would be preserved, upgraded with modern amenities, while maintaining affordable rent controls. Additional floors would be added with a mix of market rate and subsidized units. At the center of the complex, a community design center where residents could work with professional designers to transform their living spaces. "This is the new plan for Archer Developments," Maxwell explained, "and I want you to lead the design team." Eliza stared at the plans, disbelief warring with hope. "Why would you do this?" "Because you showed me that true value isn't measured in profit margins," Maxwell answered honestly. "It's measured in the lives we touch, the communities we build. You saw past my wealth to my worth, or lack thereof. And in doing so, you gave me something no amount of money could buy. Perspective." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "I've spent my life accumulating power and pushing people away, but these past weeks serving burgers beside you, seeing how you create connection everywhere you go, it changed me, Eliza. You changed me." Eliza studied his face, searching for deception and finding only vulnerability. "This doesn't erase everything." "No," Maxwell agreed, "but it's a beginning, a transformation, if you will." He smiled tentatively. "Creating a better somewhere else, for all of us." Eliza's fingers traced the architectural drawings, her dreams made manifest through his resources. "I'll need complete creative control," she stated, a hint of her spirit returning. "Naturally," Maxwell replied, hope flickering in his chest. "And you'll still need to finish your time at Burger Haven," she added, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "Doctor's orders, after all." Maxwell laughed, a genuine sound that erased years from his face. "I was hoping you'd say that. It seems I still have much to learn about proper sauce application." As they stood in Eliza's small apartment, surrounded by her designs and his possibilities, the distance between their worlds didn't seem so vast anymore. They had both been transformed. He from an arrogant billionaire to a man rediscovering his humanity. She from someone fighting alone to someone with the power to create real change. Their journey had only just begun, but as Maxwell tentatively reached for Eliza's hand and she, after a moment's hesitation, accepted it, one truth became clear. Sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't bought. They're earned through understanding, compassion, and the courage to see beyond the surface to the person beneath. 1 year later, the renovated Brighton Heights stood as a testament to possibility. Residents who had once feared displacement now thrived in revitalized spaces. The Community Design Center had become a model for other developments, with Eliza at its helm. Maxwell still visited Burger Haven once a week, not as an executive or even as an owner, but as a regular customer who knew everyone by name. His company had instituted new policies prioritizing community impact alongside profit, sending ripples through the business world. As for Maxwell and Eliza, they continued to bridge their different worlds day by day, teaching each other that true worth is measured not by what we possess, but by what we give. Not by how we are seen, but by how we see others. Sometimes on rainy nights, they would laugh about their first collision on a wet Manhattan sidewalk, the moment that began their unlikely journey from strangers to adversaries, to something neither could have imagined. Something that, unlike empires or buildings, could not be bought or sold or measured, only felt with each beat of their transforming hearts. Alexander Blackwood stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, 42 floors above Manhattan, swirling an 18-year-old Macallan in a crystal glass that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The city lights sparkled below like fallen stars, but he barely noticed them. His mind was consumed by one image: Sophia Laurent's face when she'd looked at his younger brother James earlier that evening. The engagement party had been Alexander's idea, a lavish affair at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, closed for the private event. He'd spared no expense, telling himself it was a gesture of brotherly love. But as he watched Sophia's delicate fingers intertwined with James's, something inside him had shattered. The truth he'd been denying for months finally crystallized. He was desperately, hopelessly in love with his brother's fiancée. "Mr. Blackwood?" His assistant's voice cut through his thoughts. "The board members are asking about tomorrow's meeting." Alexander turned, his features transforming into the cold mask that had earned him the nickname the Stone Emperor in financial circles. "Tell them I'll be there at 7, not 8, and reschedule my lunch with the Japanese investors." "But sir, they flew in specifically to—" "Did I stutter, Ms. Chen?" His voice was soft, but she flinched as if he'd shouted. "No, sir." She retreated, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the Manhattan skyline. Alexander drained his whiskey in one burning gulp. At 38, he'd built Blackwood Enterprises from his father's modest investment firm into a global empire worth billions. He'd crushed competitors without remorse, manipulated markets when necessary, and never apologized for his ruthlessness. The world was divided into winners and losers, and Alexander Blackwood refused to be the latter. But Sophia, she was different. An art historian with kind eyes that saw through his carefully constructed facade. He'd introduced her to James at a gallery opening, never imagining his charming, easygoing brother would capture her heart. Alexander had been too busy building his empire to pursue her himself, and now it was too late. His phone vibrated. A text from James. "Thanks again. For tonight, Alex. Sophia can't stop talking about how perfect everything was. You're the best brother anyone could ask for." Alexander's jaw tightened until it ached. He typed back, "Anything for you two." He hurled the empty glass against the wall, watching it explode into glittering fragments. Like his heart. Like his conscience. A plan was already forming in his mind. Alexander hadn't built his fortune by accepting defeat. If he wanted something, he took it, regardless of the cost. And he wanted Sophia Laurent. Tomorrow he would begin, carefully, meticulously, the way he executed every hostile takeover. His brother would never see it coming. Sophia Laurent's fingers traced the outline of an ancient Greek sculpture at the museum's conservation laboratory, her touch delicate as if caressing a lover. Alexander Blackwood watched from the doorway, transfixed by the tenderness in her eyes the color of autumn leaves caught in sunlight. "I didn't expect to see the great Alexander Blackwood in our humble workspace," she said without turning around, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Don't billionaires usually send minions for unexpected visits?" "I was in the neighborhood," he lied smoothly, having deliberately rearranged his entire day to engineer this seemingly casual encounter. "James mentioned you were leading the restoration of the new Hellenistic acquisitions." She finally turned to face him, wiping plaster dust from her hands onto her lab coat. Her dark curls were pulled back in a messy bun, exposing the elegant curve of her neck. No diamonds, no designer clothes. Yet she possessed a grace that made the socialites in his circle look like gaudy counterfeits. "Your brother exaggerates. I'm part of a team." Sophia smiled, the kind of smile that transformed her entire face. "But I appreciate your substantial donation that made this exhibition possible." Alexander moved closer, inhaling the scent of her, sandalwood and something uniquely hers. "I have a proposition for you." Wariness flickered across her features. "What kind of proposition?" "The Blackwood Foundation is establishing a new cultural heritage preservation initiative, $5 million annually." He maintained perfect eye contact, I want you to head it." Sophia's eyes widened, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "That's unexpected. Why me specifically? Your reputation precedes you. 3 degrees from prestigious universities, groundbreaking research on Hellenistic art forgeries, fluent in 5 languages." Alexander recited facts he'd memorized from the extensive dossier his private investigator had compiled. "You're the obvious choice." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I'm flattered, but I have commitments here, and with the wedding just 4 months away." "Consider it a wedding gift," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "James wants you to be happy, and I know how passionate you are about preservation work. This position would allow you to travel, establish your own protocols, hand-pick your team." He watched her carefully, seeing the professional ambition warring with suspicion. He'd deliberately crafted an offer she couldn't refuse professionally, while creating distance between her and James. The international travel would be particularly useful for his purposes. "I should discuss this with James first," she said. Alexander's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Of course. Though between us," he lowered his voice conspiratorially, James was concerned it might seem like nepotism if he mentioned it first. He wanted the offer to come directly from the foundation. The lie flowed effortlessly from his lips. Alexander had built empires on strategic falsehoods. Manipulating his brother's fiancée was child's play by comparison. "I'll think about it." Her voice was measured, but he could see the excitement she was trying to suppress. "Take all the time you need." Alexander handed her his personal card. Not the standard business card his assistant distributed, but the black titanium one with only his private number engraved in silver. "Call me directly with your decision." As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him. "Alexander, thank you for thinking of me. James always said you were different from how the media portrays you." Her words struck him with unexpected force. For a brief moment, shame threatened to surface through the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. Then he remembered the way she had looked at James at the engagement party, with a love he coveted for himself, and the shame retreated. "The media rarely gets anything right," he replied with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "I look forward to your call, Sophia." Outside the museum, his driver held the door to his Bentley open. As the luxurious vehicle merged into Manhattan traffic, Alexander stared unseeingly at the cityscape. Phase 1 was complete. The seed had been planted. His phone chimed with a message from his brother. "Heading to the airport now. We'll call when I land in Tokyo." Perfect timing. With James away for 2 weeks on business Alexander had specifically arranged, he would have ample opportunity to insert himself into Sophia's life. The game had begun. Rain lashed against the windows of Alexander's private gallery on the 30th floor of the Blackwood Tower. Lightning illuminated the Manhattan skyline in staccato flashes, casting dramatic shadows across Sophia's face as she examined the ancient Grecian amphora he'd recently acquired. "It's exquisite," she whispered, her fingers hovering reverently above the terracotta surface. "But the provenance documentation is questionable at best. Where did you say it came from?" Alexander smiled, savoring her proximity in the dimly lit space. "Does it matter? Beauty like this transcends ownership." "It absolutely matters." Her eyes flashed with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Cultural artifacts aren't trophies for billionaires' collections. They belong to humanity's shared heritage." 2 weeks had passed since their encounter at the museum. 2 weeks of carefully orchestrated meetings, charity galas where he'd ensured they were seated together, accidental encounters at her favorite bookstore, and now this private viewing of his collection. All while James remained in Tokyo, his return delayed by complications Alexander had secretly arranged. "Perhaps you're right," he conceded with a humility that would have shocked his board members. "That's precisely why I need someone like you heading the foundation to correct my cultural blind spots." Thunder growled outside as Sophia's phone chimed. Her face softened as she read the message. "It's James." The negotiations are finally wrapping up. Alexander's chest tightened. I'm sure he's eager to return. He is. A smile played on her lips. He mentioned something interesting, that he never heard about the foundation position until I told him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alexander maintained his composure but internally recalculated. I wanted to surprise him too. Corporate confidentiality and all that. Sophia set her wineglass down, studying him with new wariness. You know what's strange, Alexander? When I mentioned the salary, James was shocked. $5 million wasn't the annual budget, it was my proposed salary. A misunderstanding. Alexander waved dismissively, mind racing for a plausible explanation. I don't think so. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp as cut diamonds. The foundation paperwork doesn't exist. I checked with your legal department yesterday. Alexander felt the situation slipping from his control, a foreign sensation for a man accustomed to dominating every room, every deal, every relationship. The proposal is in early stages, he began, but Sophia cut him off. Stop lying. Despite her quiet tone, her words seemed to echo through the gallery. These coincidental meetings, the excessive attention, the job offer. What game are you playing? Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, and whatever Sophia saw there made her step back. Oh my God, she whispered. You're in love with me. The accusation hung between them like a loaded gun. Alexander had rehearsed countless scenarios, but direct confrontation wasn't among them. Sophia, he began, his carefully constructed facade cracking. Were you trying to separate me from James? Create distance between us while he's away? Her voice trembled with incredulity. Do you know how sick that is? He worships you. Alexander felt something unfamiliar. Shame, crawling up his spine like a venomous insect. But beneath it, something darker stirred. Rage at being caught, at being rejected, at losing control. James has everything handed to him, he snapped, mask finally slipping completely. Our father's affection, people's genuine respect, and now, you. He doesn't deserve you. Horror dawned on Sophia's face. And you think you do? The man who would betray his own brother? I built an empire while he was partying through college. Alexander snarled. I created his cushy executive position. Every privilege he enjoys exists because of me. That's not love, Sophia said quietly. That's ownership. And you can't own me, Alexander. She gathered her belongings, hands trembling slightly. I won't tell James about this. It would destroy him. But this, whatever this was, is over. As she moved toward the door, Alexander grabbed her wrist. You can't just walk away from me. No one walks away from me. For a moment, something dangerous flickered between them, a chemistry that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with power. Sophia jerked her arm free. Watch me. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Alexander alone in his temple of wealth and power. Outside, the storm raged on, a mirror to the tempest building inside him. He reached for his phone and dialed a private number. It's me, he said when the line connected. Implement contingency plan Icarus, target James Blackwood. His own brother. The final line he'd never thought he would cross. But Alexander Blackwood didn't lose. Ever. The emergency board meeting of Blackwood Enterprises had been called at dawn. An unprecedented move that set phones buzzing throughout Manhattan's financial district. Alexander straightened his tie before pushing open the mahogany doors, expecting to find his board members awaiting his arrival. Instead, only two people occupied the cavernous boardroom. James and Sophia. His brother's face was ashen, eyes hollowed, by what appeared to be several sleepless nights. Sophia stood beside him, her posture rigid, protective. What is this? Alexander demanded, his voice echoing in the empty space. Where's the board? There is no emergency meeting, James said, quietly. I needed to ensure you would be here. Alexander's mind calculated probabilities rapidly. Had Sophia revealed his advances despite her promise? No. James's demeanor suggested something else entirely. I received some interesting documents while in Tokyo, James continued, sliding a leather portfolio across the polished table. Financial records, offshore accounts, evidence of systematic fraud and market manipulation dating back 5 years. Ice formed in Alexander's veins. Those records were buried under layers of shell companies and digital encryption, untraceable. Amusing fiction, he said dismissively, though his heart hammered against his ribs. I don't have time for this. The SEC has already been notified, Sophia interjected, as has the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Alexander's gaze snapped, to her with newfound respect and fury. You did this. She met his stare unflinchingly. No, Alexander. You did this to yourself. James stood, pain etched in every line of his face. I've admired you my entire life, defended you when people called you heartless, believed there was goodness beneath the ruthless exterior. His voice cracked. I never thought you'd destroy yourself to hurt me. I built this company from nothing. Alexander slammed his fist on the table. Everything we have is because of me. And you were willing to sacrifice it all, your reputation, your freedom, just to sabotage my happiness. James shook his head in disbelief. What happened in Tokyo wasn't an accident, was it? Those investors who suddenly pulled out the contract clauses that magically changed overnight. Alexander remained silent, his mind racing for an escape strategy. There was always a way out, a loophole, a bargaining chip. Your contingency plan failed, Sophia said. You told your associate to implement Icarus. Classic mythology, the boy who flew too close to the sun. She tilted her head. But you forgot how that story ends. Icarus falls. The betrayal pierced deeper than Alexander had anticipated. Who leaked the financial records? Victoria Chen, James replied. Your loyal assistant of 7 years. Apparently, loyalty has its limits, especially when you threaten to destroy innocent people. The walls seemed to close in around Alexander. For the first time in his adult life, he had no countermove, no strategic response. The board meeting is actually scheduled for noon, James continued. They'll vote on your removal as CEO. Given the evidence, it will be unanimous. Alexander laughed bitterly. And let me guess, you'll take my place? The prodigal son ascending the throne? No. James's answer was unexpected. I'm stepping away from Blackwood Enterprises entirely. I'm done living in the shadow of your empire. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Federal agents, no doubt, coming to escort the great Alexander Blackwood from his glass tower. Why are you here, then? Alexander asked, genuine confusion breaking through his anger. To gloat? To understand, James replied simply. Was there ever a moment when you truly loved me as a brother? Or was I always just another possession to you? The question stripped away Alexander's remaining defenses. In the silence that followed, decades of resentment, jealousy, and unacknowledged pain surfaced. Father always favored you, he finally said, voice barely audible. Everything came easily to you, friendship, love, happiness, things I could buy but never truly possess. Oh, Alexander. James's eyes filled with tears. You never needed to possess them. You only needed to deserve them. The elevator chimed down the hallway. Footsteps approached, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Sophia took James's hand. We should go. As they reached the door, Alexander called after them. What happens now? You face the consequences of your actions, Sophia replied without turning around. Something you've probably never had to do before. And you too? Something vulnerable flickered across Alexander's features, perhaps the most genuine emotion he'd shown in years. James paused, meeting his brother's gaze one final time. We start over, somewhere far from here, far from you. They left as federal agents entered, badges extended. Alexander Blackwood stood alone in the empire he'd built, watching it crumble around him like the shattered glass he'd hurled against his penthouse wall the night this all began. 3 months later, from a federal detention center awaiting trial, Alexander received a postcard. No return address, no message, just an image of a small coastal village in Greece. The final move in their chess game, letting him know they had found happiness beyond his reach. And in the sterile confines of his cell, surrounded by the consequences of his ambition and arrogance, Alexander Blackwood did something he hadn't done since childhood. He wept for everything he'd gained, for everything he'd lost, for the man he might have been.